So,
Well, the first article that I wrote that had an impact, that I would say really had an impact, was an article on Ra, which was a Jewish organization that appeared on the scene, I think it was 1973, and swept all before it. The New York Times ran front page articles on it. It was big news. And what it was, and the reason the New York Times was so excited about it would naturally go way back in the way the New York Times looked at Israel, was because this was suddenly an organization of Jews. Prominent intellectuals were in it, prominent Jewish intellectuals like Nathan Glazer, and Seymour Martin Lipset, and a plethora, above all, of rabbis. And all of them saying the same thing now, that Jews should be, what should be done was to create a state for the PLO. And this would bring peace to Israel. This was heresy at the time. And the reason that the pamphlet caught on, my pamphlet against Ra, which was put out by Americans for a Safe Israel, I remember we all gathered together in Herb Zweibon's basement, filling envelopes with it. The reason that the pamphlet caught on was that it pointed out that for all this panoply of establishment-type figures in this organization, the leadership was actually came from anti-Israel organizations, above all an organization called CONAIM, Committee on New Alternatives for the Middle East, whatever it's called. And this was a truly, I mean, even Time magazine had called CONAIM one of the foremost pro-Arab organizations in the U.S. It had lobbied against Arms for Israel in 1973, when, you know, Israel was in dire straits at the time of the 73 war. So pointing out that these were the people who were actually running the show caused a big stir within the organization, because most of the people in or who were supporting this new exciting Ra organization were pro-Israel. And I remember, apparently I heard about this, that at one meeting of Ra supporters, Betty Friedan stood up and shook my pamphlet in front of the crowd and, you know, started making a fuss about it. So this did cause a major stir within a narrow segment of society, namely this pro-Israel, or, you know, the pro-Israel world. And it brought down Ra. I mean, that was truly the most successful thing I ever did, because Ra dissolved. And dissolved because they started fighting with each other. And as a result, it took a while before something similar to Ra, of course, because Ra was tapping into something that was important within American Jewish society, and it was going to get out no matter what. So you got the New Jewish Agenda some years later, and then eventually the New Israel Fund. And at the time of Ra, actually, one of the purposes that Ra set itself was to create an alternative to the standard Jewish fundraising organizations. And of course, the New Israel Fund turned out to be exactly that, funding all the anti-Israel organizations. So I would say that was the most, it was small, but it was truly successful because it ended Ra. Then in the next thing that I did that I would say had an impact was an article that I wrote for Midstream on the Institute for Policy Studies. Now that was, Ra was around, I think the Ra pamphlet that was about 1976 or 7, and the Institute for Policy Studies article, I think it was 1979, 1980, a few years later. And this one, Midstream was a minor Jewish vehicle publication, but again, Eric and I remember sitting down and we were writing endless envelopes, sending out copies of this article, which we thought was pretty exciting because it again showed a major, this is a general institute, the Institute for Policy Studies, a policy advisory kind of organization which was prominent in Washington, D.C., and focused on its anti-American but also anti-Israel aspects. And this got picked up by a lot of places, including Barron's Magazine, of all things, which ran a two-part series, basically reprinting the article. I guess there were some changes in it. I remember Jim Grant, who went on to do I think the Grant Report, some kind of long-running market studies. Anyway, he was my editor there. And he had to protect me from the editor-in-chief, Alan something or other, who didn't like the article, and Jim Grant very much did like the article. Anyway, it got through, and Barron's was just one of the places that picked this up. Now, that was unsuccessful. I mean, in terms of Rael, we killed the organization. Institute for Policy Studies is still going. And but it caused them a lot of angst because they wrote this long rebuttal to Midstream, which it published, and then I did a rebuttal to the rebuttal. It was all quite exciting. But in terms of ending the Institute for Policy Studies or changing it in any way, they were worried, but they didn't need to be. They are part of the winning culture war. And the third piece that I'd say that I wrote that had a major impact was a tiny little piece, only 5 pages. The Reader's Digest didn't give you any space. It was on the National Council of Churches and its radicalism. And this, because of where it was published, the Reader's Digest, which went to kind of all the people, the kinds of people who put money in the church, whatever you call that, what they circulate on Sunday. These were all the man in the street funders of of the churches, that this really hit them hard. And I have a whole file cabinet, one long file drawer of the responses that article drew. It was the second most, at the time, I don't know if it's changed, probably not, the second most requested reprint that the Reader's Digest ever had. And I remember how excited I was when I was on my walking to my mother's to visit her, and on Park Avenue, where I turned to go to Lexington, where she lived, there was a church, and it had in front of it the notice of the sermon for next week, and it was going to be a diatribe against my article. So you could see that it was having an effect. And then 60 Minutes, believe it or not, ran a feature on the Institute of Religion and Democracy, which was one of the sources I used, and it was it was anti-National Council of Churches. I mean, hard to believe. And it caused this thing caused a huge stir in the National Council of Churches. They even had an article in one of their journals which said that the author didn't exist. And the way they knew that I didn't exist was that my name was Isaac, which means laughter. In other words, the National Council of Churches was telling you this was a huge joke. So that was, I would say, a very successful article. Now, in terms of other things that I wrote, I would say that two things were, I would call prescient, even though they didn't, I wouldn't say they had any impact. One was a first book on Israel called Israel Divided, Ideological Politics in the Jewish State, which focused on, that was published, let's see, here's Israel Divided.
You can show it in this screen. You can actually, yeah, there it is. Yeah,
there it is. And I'm just trying to see the date. This is the paperback edition, so I'm not sure of the date. 1976 is the original copyright for it. And what was prescient about it was the focus was on, in the aftermath of the Six-Day War, there were two movements, neither of which were big, but they were there, and they were different. And one of them said that all the territories had to be returned, and it was the peace movement, and they had different ways of returning it. They all disagreed how they should be returned. I mean, at the time there was no PLO. And so to the Palestinians, to the Jordanians, the autonomous, I mean, they had all kinds of ideas, but they all said they had to be, Israel had to lead them for the sake of its democratic character, and for peace because you needed the goodwill of the Palestinians. And then there was the Land of Israel movement, which brought together a lot of former enemies who wouldn't speak to each other, typical in Israel. And they now all became part of this movement from the left, from the right, to say that all the territories must be kept. And what was prescient about the book was it said that this was going to be the line which was going, I think it was the last line of the book, which was going to guide and divide Israeli politics in the future. In other words, the future of the territories was going to be the central issue for decades to come. And at the time, that was, may seem pretty obvious now, but it wasn't at all. A lot of people, in fact, maybe it was the dominant idea, was the Sephardim versus the Ashkenazim, the oppressed Easterners versus the dominant Ashkenazi Westerners, and this was going to be the big conflict. And you had these, there were groups that made that seem more reasonable. You eventually got those Black Panthers who imitated the Black Panthers here, and claimed that they were oppressed, etc. But as it turned out, I was right. This was the line which is still dividing the public. I mean, there's a religious, secular dimension to it, but it works out into a line about the argument about the future of what Israel should look like. And then the other book that had no impact at all, but was also prescient, was Roosters of the Apocalypse, which was published by the Heartland Institute, which also got no credit for, has been totally ignored, though its role has been absolutely crucial in as initial fighters against the green movement and the apocalyptic notion that the earth is in imminent danger of destruction if we don't end our CO2 emissions. And I say this was published in 2012, and at that time, just nobody except Heartland, which published this, was paying any attention really to this issue. Even, I mean, there was plenty of attention was being paid to the issue. It was all on one side. And even the right, except for, what was his name in the Congress, the one who was constantly saying that this was a scam.
Oh, I forgot.
Yeah. Well, anyway, apart from him, you had kind of the right had given up on it. I mean, yes, science says that this is a terribly dangerous thing. So they either, and they were, I guess the politicians were also scared that there'd be these environmentalists who were so enthusiastic on this issue would make this an issue in the elections, which would hurt them. So for whatever variety of reasons, the right didn't do anything with the issue and just was silent, and the left was making a big fuss about it. So nowadays, of course, that has changed. I mean, the Ukraine war did more than anything else to change it, because it suddenly, instead of constantly virtue signaling and making it appear that as the minutes drew on, you were going to have this world without emissions, and nobody was talking about European dependence, continued dependence on oil and gas. All they were talking about was European progress toward solar and wind. Well, that's changed, and there's a lot of talk now about the negatives of and the impossibility, in fact, of this green revolution actually taking place as promised. But I'd say Roosters of the Apocalypse certainly was talking of the issue before its time.